Professor Derderian, thank you so much for joining us. As we heard from our reporter out of D.C., we heard economic, diplomatic sanctions and options being floated on the table from President Obama, and none that include the military. Is this option off the table, or is this the last resort?
Well, there's been some saber rattling, but he has invoked history, and I think he's aware that people don't intend to go to war. They stumble into war. So I think he's trying to keep the diplomatic option on the table right now.
Is this shaping up to be a test of wills between Putin and Obama? Obama's seen right now as a bit of a weak president, as opinion polls do state in the U.S. Could this be Putin's chance to exert some strength and power over what he sees to be a weaker counterpart?
I'm not sure. I mean, if the most similar moment was in Georgia, and we had a president who was known to bluster and was very strong, and yet President Putin went into Georgia and there was very little response. So it's not so much about the personalities as I think it is a larger systemic force working. There's a lot of factors right now and variables that could lead to miscalculations, and I think it's beyond our leaders in similar ways to how, not to invoke the First World War frivolously, but nobody wanted that war, but incompetence did lead to outcomes nobody wished for.
So what do you think are the integral next steps here that you are going to be monitoring, as well as the rest of us, to look for any signs that this could devolve into something much more serious?
Well, interestingly enough, many people point to the modern period as the least likely period of major states to go to war. But the fact is that it was a matter of integration. It was the issue of the Eurasian Union that first provoked this crisis. There are parallels of the idea of interdependence preventing any nation state from going to war. But the fact is, interdependence also creates vulnerabilities. And you have a gas pipeline. If that gets shut off, a lot of Europe will suffer greatly. Of course, the Ukrainians as well.
And that is the key. Russia is suffering at the moment. We have the MISEX down the lowest in 5 years. We've got the ruble tumbling as well. It is the world's largest energy exporter, but if it shuts off the tap, conceivably, it could also be hurting itself.
Yeah, it goes both ways, absolutely. And it comes down to the fact how Putin and others do their risk-benefit. You'd like to believe this is going to be a rational calculation, but unfortunately it's often an emotional one. Loss of face, disrespect, all of these play into this outcome. I have a great concern. I mean, again, the closest parallel might be the Crimean War. History doesn't repeat itself, but as Mark Twain said, it does rhyme. And in this case, again, there's also religious issues. There are ethnic issues. And if that's beyond the ability of any one leader to really cope with, you might need to have external help on this one.
So do you think this G7 action is enough here, the economic and diplomatic actions of the international community to put pressure on Russia to step back from the brink?
Sanctions only go so far. They're slow-moving. This is a fast-moving crisis. You need to build some fire breaks in. I think Senator Kerry, now Secretary of State Kerry, going to the region, and others attest to the willingness of the Europeans to stand behind Ukraine. But the worst thing you want to get into is where war games and scenarios take over. That starts that kind of incremental move that's very hard to stop, type of something we saw during the war planning before other wars, where diplomacy loses out to military strategy.
I want to ask you how China might play a role here. We heard from the Russian ministry saying it met with China, which expressed, quote unquote, understanding of the Russian analysis of Ukraine's internal political crisis. How much of that understanding could flow through?
Well, this is puzzling. I mean, both China and Russia like to exert the principle of sovereignty, of non-intervention in the affairs of other states. and yet in this instance, a curious kinship, and this could backfire. Russia claiming to come to the aid of Russian-speaking peoples is somewhat stretchable, elastic concept. There are Chinese-speaking peoples in eastern Siberia right now. Would China, if some crisis erupted there, invoke this principle? My chair of the department is a Russian-speaking person. Should we expect Spetsnaz to be parachuted into Sydney University? I mean, this is not a legal principle that I think will uphold, and it's curious that China would support it.
So what can we expect next?
Well, you very much hope that everyone will stay in the diplomatic mode. There is a case, I think, of what organizational theorists call in big complex systems a negative synergy, where complex systems run away from the will of individual leaders. So you have to make sure that the process is slowed down. You don't cause others to lose face. At the same time, you don't back down. It's a very careful and measured exercise in coercive diplomacy right now. And you just hope that the individual leaders are up to it. I hope actually the leaders are reading Margaret Macmillan's Rime of History, which is about the lead up to the First World War. President Kennedy supposedly was reading Barbara Tuchman's Guns of August, which was also about the lead up to the First World War. So learning some lessons from history might be the best advice I'd give to any of the leaders involved right now.